Hey everybody, what's going on? Hellmite here, bringing you another video from Grab the Lantern today. It's Tuesday and the patch notes for patch 11.3 have been posted, which means it's time to break down the top 5 changes in this week's patch. As always, I'll be looking at the top 5 changes, which means the most impactful changes that you guys are going to see in your games coming forward, and ideally things that mostly will involve regular play, but sometimes we'll talk about pro play a little bit here. First and foremost, let's go ahead and talk about the healing item nerfs here that Riot have thrown out, as I think that those are the biggest changes here, and probably the ones that you guys are most likely zooming in on. Now, a lot of these changes are in regards to Riot's philosophy on sustain, which they talk a little bit about in another post, but the TLDR is that sustain has good effects on the game, but it can also have very negative effects on the game if healing is very strong, especially in regards to something like Gore Drinker giving a tank back basically all of their health so they can continue their rampage, and Gore Drinker in general has been crowding out options for virtually all other fighters. I mean, almost every single fighter builds Gore Drinker, even some assassins build Gore Drinker. It's just really, really strong in that regard, and that goes for all of these healing items. A lot of them are just very, very powerful due to the presence of Omnivamp, which, unlike Lifesteal, which kind of requires your auto attacks to be strong for it to be strong, Omnivamp just requires you to do damage with abilities, which can really make some champions just completely heal too much and really remove a lot of the ability to fight back against them, even before they're able to get their full mythic. So all of these items are getting nerfed down. This is affecting Gore Drinker, Legion Leer, Riftmaker, Eclipse, Ravenous Hydra, and Sterix Gauge, which we'll talk about here in a second. But these items are all items that you can build early on that give you sustain, that are able to keep you in a fight for longer, and especially keep you in lane for longer. So they're all getting a bit of a nerf to their healing, but a bit of a bump to their other stats in order to make it so that these items are more about what else they're giving you beyond just, I want this so I can heal. The Sterix Gauge nerf is a kind of a weird nerf here, as I didn't really consider it to be much of a sustain ability or a sustain item, but it has been basically a guaranteed must-buy second item for every fighter in the game just because of how efficient it is at keeping them alive. So it does make sense that the base shield on Sterix Gauge is getting nerfed down, as well as the shield duration, to make it a little bit less attractive as a automatic second item, and a little bit more of an item that you consider building but isn't an item that you know you have to get. And speaking of items you have to get, let's go ahead and talk about enchanter items. I think it's not taken very long at all for people to realize just how good Staff of Flowing Water is. That item has been absolutely absurd, especially in conjunction with Moonstone Renewer, so Riot are trying to nerf it down so it's less attractive as a second item, which therefore opens up builds a little bit more, so it's not the automatic second choice. You obviously can still take the second, but it's not quite as gold efficient, especially when you compare it to some of the other options that you may want to go for, like Ardent Censer. Additionally, I wanted to talk about the Chemcheck Putrefier change here. I don't think this buff can be understated. The old iteration of this item was not very good, because if you were able to land CC on somebody who's really sustainy, who you need to kill, something like a Katarina or an Akali jumping on your backline, for example, they were probably already dead. If you hit that crowd control, you probably were already going to get the kill on that champion, regardless of the heal cut, because, hey, they're CC'd and you can now burst them down. This change now allows you to apply those grievous wounds significantly easier. Now it's just as a requirement to shield your friend, and your friend just has to hit the enemy champion you want to have the healing debuff, and that's automatically 60% grievous wounds. That's incredibly reliable, and it really, really helps the enchanter champions have an effect on the game. At this point, I feel like you don't even have to go that Executioner's Calling as an AD carry anymore. Just tell your support to give you a Chemcheck Putrefier, and for the most part, that's all you're going to need to do, unless, of course, the support doesn't have heals or shields. Then obviously there's something to be considered, but generally speaking, this is a huge usability buff to Chemcheck Putrefier, and definitely keep it in mind if you are an enchanter player into healing enemy teams. Moving on to talk about champions here, I wanted to cover Taliyah changes here real quick. She's been an outlier in pro play due to her high clear rate coupled with very strong map presence thanks to her ultimate, and her ganks are incredibly powerful, and I think it's no surprise at all that she has been sort of returning to a pick ban type champion situation. So Riot are trying to tweak her here a little bit so that she's less of a must-pick champion, especially in the jungle, but more of a champion that you can still play in the mid lane, especially in casual play. The buffs to rock surfing will help her roam slightly better. It does help her get around the map a little bit better if you are jungling with her, but I do think this is slightly more relevant in the mid lane because you are more easily able to kind of shove and then walk into river, get this procced, and then get going, as opposed to the jungle where you're constantly in combat, which limits your ability to actually use this ability. And the Q change here, now that you deal less damage against monsters, it means that your clear is slightly slower, which means that you're going to take more damage, which means you're a lot more vulnerable to counter jungling, and it also means that Talia now actually has some decisions to make, as opposed to just clear every camp and then go gank and put pressure on the map, because it takes you a little bit longer, so now it's a little bit more of a trade-off on, do I have time to do this camp before I can make it to this lane, that sort of a thing. So, interesting Talia changes here. I really like the direction Riot are taking with them, and it does make sense, given how powerful Talia has been, especially in pro play. Moving on to another champion who has been doing pretty well for herself is Seraphine, which is interesting to see here in the patch notes. I haven't really considered her to be tremendously out of line, but she has a very strong presence both at mid lane and at support, so I guess it does make a certain amount of sense for Riot to nerf her down. And the places they nerfed her, I do think makes sense. The passive note damage going down is a big deal, because that was a lot of Seraphine's unavoidable chip damage in lane. She could kind of cast spells to wave clear and then just auto attack you for a bunch of free damage, especially if she's in a dual lane where she's getting those extra notes from her ally. Like, that's chip damage you can't really dodge. Her skill shots might be slow, but there's nothing you can do about her right clicking you from a very long range away, especially given that the range boost is built into this ability. So I do like the fact that this has been nerfed down. It's a very slight nerf, but it makes a difference, especially over a long period of time with Seraphine landing multiple auto attacks onto you. I do like where this is at. The W shield going down makes her a little bit less able to sponge off trades or protect her ally from being just sort of negating whatever trades you're trying to do to her. So I do like both of these nerfs. They make Seraphine generally less good. She has less poke, she has less durability, so it means that she's a little bit more forced to rely on her general utility as opposed to specifically just being good at everything. So I like where these nerfs have ended for Seraphine. Finally, for my fifth change here, let's go ahead and talk about Jinx. Now, these changes are generally going to be Riot buffing up a champion who is still very popular, but whose popularity sort of declined due to how lackluster the champion is, especially compared to current releases. This is essentially a lot of people who say, you know, we want to play Jinx, but she just doesn't feel as good to play in comparison to some of the other champions. She also has not had as powerful of an impact given the most recent item changes, so these are intended to move power from her base stats back into her playmaking potential to breathe some life back into her. And I think these changes are incredibly good, by the way. Now, her base health did take a huge hit here. The 60 base health down is actually massive, especially on an already squishy champion. This will make Jinx very, very vulnerable in the early stages of the game in particular, but she gains some massive offensive potential to compensate. The 200 bonus range with Switcheroo is massive. Now, this is only a 25 bump over her previous iteration, but make no mistake, any amount of range increase on a champion is absolutely huge. Kayle only gains 50 range increase when she hits level 16 versus what she was before, but that's a huge change. It allows Kayle to play just so much more defensively and so much more safely DPS from the backline. So having the bump from 175 to 200 for Jinx is still a massive deal for Jinx. I can't really understate it too much that this is going to be a huge change for Jinx, especially when it's coupled with the only 10% bonus attack speed penalty when in rocket launcher mode as opposed to 25%. So Jinx is not only attacking you with rockets from further away, but also the rockets are coming out faster, which makes her feel a little bit more fluid to play and really enables her to get that rocket launcher damage in the later stages of the game, play back safely, rocket people from a distance, and really not suffer too much of a DPS drop by comparison. The Flame Chomper's changes here are mostly in order to improve the quality of life. This is so now that it will cast at max range instead of causing you to walk into max range and then cast the ability, so there's a little bit more fluidity there. And the arm time going down as well means that it's easier to use this in a reactive case, where you can drop the Chompers and they arm much more quickly, so that an enemy champion is more likely to step on them as opposed to walk over them and then the Chompers arm. Now, the mana cost did go up, but this was an ability you didn't really use that much on Jinx anyways. It really was intended to be her sort of last-ditch scenario. I absolutely have to get at a dodge tool, or something she can use to set up, or to follow up on crowd control from her support. So I like these changes for Jinx, and I really think they're going to breathe some power back into Jinx, and hopefully breathe some life back into this champion. And that's going to be it for me today, guys. Go ahead and let me know which changes you're most excited for down in the comment section below. I would love to hear your guys' thoughts. If you enjoyed today's video, go ahead and leave a like. And if you really enjoyed today's video, consider subscribing. I upload a video every Monday, Friday, and on patch days like today as well. Once again, thank you guys so very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I'll talk to you all later.